I'm Cecily Saylor, and I'm the founder of Typewriter Tarot, and you are watching Cosmic Rescue, which is a show where I interview a creative person about a creative predicament they're facing, and we use tarot to explore that particular challenge and gain new insight, gain new inspiration, and new motivation for the creative journey. The tarot spread that you will see in each episode is one that you can try yourself, and I highly encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to give this video a like and to subscribe to our YouTube channel because that helps more creative people out there find the support that we're offering, and that is really the goal. In this episode, I talked to Sweetco Zamorano Chavez, who is an Austin-based visual artist. And Sweetco's work typically explores the intersections between various cultures. Sweetco is a person who wears many hats. They are a mental health care professional, they are a poet and a storyteller, in addition to being an artist, and they are also an activist. Sweetco identifies as Two-Spirit and grew up in an indigenous community in Central America and came to the United States at the age of 14. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what happens when your usual sources of inspiration are suddenly inaccessible. Certainly, like maybe, for example, during a pandemic, if, say, going out into the community and being around people is a big part of your inspiration, what happens when you can't do that anymore? We start to feel a little bit lost. We don't know what we're making or why or who we're making it for. So if that's ever a feeling you've had, why am I making this? Who is it for? Then this episode is for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Sweetco. Welcome to Cosmic Rescue. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Sweetco Zamorano Chavez is a visual artist. Their work focuses on intersectional cultures. Sweetco is also a mental health professional and an activist in several different ways. They participate in Women of Color Collective, the Q Austin, the Gay Agenda. These are organizations that focus on social justice and community building and bringing awareness to the concerns and cultures of groups that are often marginalized. Sweetco is originally from an indigenous community in Central America, and they moved to the US around the age of 14. And much of their work is inspired by their origins in that community and the experience of coming to the US, but also including indigenous inspiration and also mental health insight into these beautifully blended, inspiring, stimulating pieces that you'll get to see a few of today. So let's dig in, Sweetco. Can you talk a little bit about your work before the pandemic? It sounded like things were in a good, pretty exciting place, and then this virus showed up.
Yeah. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I felt that, before the pandemic, there was a lot of co-working together. A lot of my work comes from me connecting with community, like you said. And a lot of outside inspiration as well. One of the pieces that I did that got recently purchased, I used a local park that had a flowing river to get my inspiration for one of the indigenous pieces that I did. I like to usually paint from memory or paint from experience, but I wanted to get the realness that comes from the outside nature. So being restricted inside kind of changes some of that. So I painted this one behind me before the pandemic, and I got the inspiration from a Selena drag show, and I painted this piece behind me with the vibrant colors, and the queens really inspired me. And I love Selena. I've always loved Selena. So they inspired me to paint this piece. And then this piece on this side, I named it Death. So on this other side, you have the general Central American, Mexican ideology of death. And on this side, is a Totopec depiction of death and the way that we celebrate death. So in both cultures, we celebrate death in different ways. And this one was inspired pre-COVID, but when COVID hit and there was a lot of numbers coming around, I didn't want people's experiences or deaths to kind of go in vain and overlook everything that was going on, and people were kind of pushing it under the rug. So I wanted to commemorate the Black and brown peoples who were being ignored in some of the cases that were happening, being mislabeled of their deaths. So I wanted to, bring that to light and bring that awareness. And that's where this piece kind of came together with before COVID, and then kind of during I finished it. So my vision stayed the same, but it kind of changed just a tad bit with COVID kind of hitting and affecting all of us, really.
And you mentioned the drag show that inspired the Selena piece. And in an earlier conversation, you talked about how much like being out with people, going to like readings or art shows or performances like that really fueled your work.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I get a lot of my inspiration from the communities around me and the cultures around me. And before, when we were able to be in community together, come together for things like Queer Bomb, local Austin things, Mexicarte always had events going on. And I would always get inspired by people's creativity, love for culture, love for community, excuse me. So a lot of my pieces are really about that, right? And how there's these overlapping identities and intersectional identities that come from it. So for example, the queens with the Selena piece, they're queer, and some of them identify as trans, and they're also Latinx. So and another piece that I'm actually working on right now is queer mariachi. So that's another piece too. And I got inspired by a live show that Mariachi Arcoiris did. They're a mariachi band in California. So I've still been trying to find ways to still be in community, even though I couldn't be there in person. Watching their performance inspired me to want to do this piece coming up. But all of my pieces are really inspired by the people that are around me, including community. And that's, going to shows, attending events, having connecting with other artists too, and getting their insight on their perspectives on a topic that I have, and kind of blending those ideas together and highlighting that through art, through visual art, through my poetry too. And then also working with clients in the mental health setting, that one-on-one. It is a little different through a screen. The connectivity is not as vibrant as when we're in person, but I still try to bring that out and not have them feel so disconnected through a screen.
And your work really does explore the intersection of these many different identities. You might be combining two different identities into one piece, or multiple identities, and some pieces may focus here and others elsewhere, and combined, they really represent this diverse range of what people are, what people can be, how they live and express their identity. Can you talk a little bit about why that emphasis on intersectionality is so important for you, and how your art helps you to understand some of those intersections?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I noticed coming to this country from where, the indigenous area that I was from, is there's a lot of boxes and a lot of othering, especially when thinking about, like, for example, like the queer community and the Latinx community, or the queer community and the indigenous community. And oftentimes when we make very specific distinctions between two communities, a lot of the people that feel like they belong to both communities are often left out. Like, for example, Afro-Latina identifying people are often left out of the Latinx talk or, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I really, when I do these pieces, I really want people to see and remember and understand that people are so complex and they're more than just one thing. And also thinking in a binary, like two poles of an extreme. And it kind of forces people to fit one or the other and not live somewhere in the fluidity of a scale. And I really try to bring that out in my art. I try to show people that you can be both or neither or all in the art that I do, and kind of blending those ideas together in the fact that everybody is so complex. Like, nobody is just a woman. Nobody is just queer. Nobody is just their career, like, so for example, myself, I'm not just a writer, even in the artistic sense. I'm not just a writer. I'm not just a poet. I'm not just a visual artist. I don't just practice mental health with my clients. I'm also a partner. I'm also queer. I'm also indigenous. I'm also a student at the moment. But I'm also an educator at the same time. So, and sometimes that can be confusing. And these are kind of a little bit more simplistic in the way to look at it, using, general definitions. But there are other identities and labels that people have that sometimes people will say, well, you can't be this and this. You can't have this identity and this other identity. And through my art, I want to show that you can have more than one identity, just as long as it fits your definition of what it is. And it's okay to embrace more than one of your identities all at the same time.
I think it's so important for people to remember that. Like, as a tarot reader, some of what comes up in a tarot reading sometimes is like, yes, you are this, but you are also this. And inside the person, there's this like divide between one or the other, or having to like be one at this time and be this one at the other time, and trying to encourage the dissolution of those walls that separate those different aspects of the self, and saying like all of those can coexist and be part of you simultaneously, and you can embrace them. And I think it's especially important for, the white heteronormative dominant culture to be reminded again and again, and to see through beautiful works of art like yours, that there is so much more in terms of what it means to be human. And then also for the folks that you're reflecting, it must be really wonderful to see that identity expressed in such beautiful paintings and poems. So I think it's incredible that that's what drives your work. And I do know that the pandemic brought a little bit of a kind of rained on the artistic parade, the creativity parade for you, as it has for many people. Can you talk about, especially because a lot of your inspiration and creativity was fueled by community, which has been very much changed by the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit about kind of what it was like for you as things changed and we went into our respective little holes to ride this out?
Sure, absolutely. So in the beginning, I think a lot of people tried their best to come together to still create community. But I felt that. I felt that disconnect. I felt people wanting to take time to breathe for themselves. And in doing that, a lot of the projects that I had in the making, in the works, working on, kind of was put to a halt. I was part of some writing groups, and we still tried to keep up the writing circle together, but it was difficult. People's schedules changes, people's lives changed with the pandemic. And then I was also working on a project to bring more Indigenous artists together and bringing to light Indigenous culture. But with the pandemic and wanting to keep our community safe, we had to either halt the project, and we took a little bit of it and we kind of altered it just a bit. So a lot of the projects that I was working on or working with people, we had to kind of modify and find different insight and different ways to go about the way that we were bringing our art to life, and still trying to inspire people, to connect and to come together in different ways, like kind of like we are now. But it looks different now, and the art kind of changed in the sense of, like, for example, this art piece behind me, originally I had gone with a different color scheme. So colors are a big deal where I'm from. So I changed the color scheme to reflect the changes that were happening with COVID. So a lot of my ideas kind of had to shift or be put on pause. But I have like a list of, when we're able to connect again and be in community again, I'll be able to start those projects up.
And I remember you saying, I think, that as the world was changing so much and all of this urgency was being brought to, the pandemic arrived, there's all these questions of life or death. The Black Lives Matter movement had a huge resurgence after the murder of George Floyd. So much intensity suddenly springing up in our lives that it's hard to sort of find your way. It's like, with the world like this, what does my art mean now? Is that something that you felt?
I definitely felt that. I felt that I was trying to find my place to support the movements, right? Because that's originally what I had done, but also knowing and being aware of my own identities. What did that look like for me? And how could I still be supportive to, the different communities that I engage with, the different communities that I belong to in my art? So there was a little bit of a fraction there for me in trying to figure out, well, how can I move forward? Even though I'm modifying some pieces, how some of these other pieces that I was thinking about doing or that I have maybe not be appropriate at the time. So what does that look like for me as an artist? Should I change my style? How do I keep my style, but at the same time being respectful to other artists who have a different perspective on everything that's going on? So that's kind of where I was, what I was thinking about when the pandemic hit, and really trying to be intentional about the way I moved forward. But I was kind of in a bit of a rut of trying to figure out what that looked like.
Yeah, and I think that's a common experience for a lot of artists during this time. It's like, what does my work mean now that the world is so different? I mean, it's very much the same, but also very different. And so I appreciate you sharing this particular struggle, because I do think it's like almost universal among creative people in 2020. But we together came up with this tarot spread to help maybe like find a path forward, or feel, help you reconnect with the purpose in your work and what you might be able to focus on given all the changes that have happened. So this tarot spread ended up being 5 cards, and the first 2 cards talk to each other. And the question there, or the request of the tarot in this case, is show me 2 things in combination that I can play with. And that's particularly suited for you with your exploration of intersectionality. But of course, in art, there are tensions everywhere. That's what makes art interesting and dramatic for us as consumers of art. We want to see things in opposition, or we want to see these tensions or things that are playing against each other to help us see them in different ways. So this idea of like, let's see 2 things that we can play with. The next question we had is, what message can I convey as I work with these 2 concepts that would show up in the first 2 cards? The fourth question is, who needs to hear this message, which I thought was really important for you to remember who your audience is and why you make this. And, it isn't just the creative drive that comes through you, though that's a huge part of it, but also the art, this idea that the art should exist because there are people who do need to see it. And then finally, why am I the person to create this? So your cards were super interesting. They always are. For the two things to look at in combination that you can play with, you had the Five of Swords, and then a card from this other deck. Actually, before we get into the cards, can you talk a little bit about the two decks that you use? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the tarot deck that I used was the Everyday Witch. It's one that I have been playing around with a little bit and getting to know a little bit more about tarot through this deck. And then I also used the Santa Muerte Oracle deck. And that one was interesting to use in combination with this. And we'll get to see right now why and how.
All right. So in your first two cards, the two things in combination that you can play with, you pulled one card from the tarot deck and one card from the Oracle deck. The card from the tarot deck was the Five of Swords, and the card from the Oracle deck is the World of Creations. So let's start with the Five of Swords. And this one in your deck shows this gathering of witches, three everyday witches just gathering together. And it looks like they're in the middle of making a spell or enacting something like that. But one of the witches is kind of like dominating the situation. Are there other details you want to point to in that card?
Right. So I did notice that there was one witch that was dominating. They also have a hold of two of the swords. So it already causes like a little bit of a disbalance between it. And then there was one witch, we can't see their face, but they're distraught. And then there's another witch kind of holding her arms up, kind of saying like, why? You know, what's going on here? You know, with there's obvious intention here, especially being three black cats at the bottom, that there was supposed to be some unification and some balance between the three.
Yeah, this card, there's that witch like co-opted. It's like in the middle of producing the spell, one of the witches has decided to sort of take over the process and take it in whatever kind of take the spell in a direction according to their own agenda. This card reminds me of like the mindset of the colonizer, the mindset of the dominant culture, like, oh, let's all come together and do this thing. And then in the process, once it begins, the dominant power holders start to do what they think is best. And that idea of unity and collaboration is all just for show, right?
Absolutely.
Which seems so appropriate for your work because you are talking about you're working with these different marginalized cultures that have experienced this kind of domination or control for generations, for centuries. And your work comes in to bring the focus back to the cultures that should be a bigger part of the conversation. And then your other card is the World of Creations. And can you talk a little bit about that? This card, just when I saw it, like something inside me like melted away and I went to another dimension or something. It's so beautiful.
Right. So this specific card, they are known, they're one of the deities in a lot, well, specifically the Aztec, but also understanding that there's a little bit of Aztec roots in some of the other indigenous groups around, including the group that I'm from. So this deity is a deity of rain. It can be explained in different ways, but they really control water. They really control the water on Earth. So they can bring rainfall for harvest, but they could also bring hurricanes and floods. So they have the power to bring very important natural resource to us, but they can also use it in a destructive way as well. So understanding that they have the power to create life through with water, and also understanding water and the fact that it's very fluid, right? And especially with things like rivers and oceans, it can take so many different shapes and forms. So that's what I got from this specific card, and also understanding it from a cultural perspective, and how the deity has the power to tip the scales in either way that they see fit.
And so the two together are this really interesting combination. And it's interesting, I'm just thinking now, like that cauldron in the Five of Swords is filled with liquid, some kind of water. There's this, and that's being used as creative energy for whatever spell they're trying to produce. So those two themes are present in both of them. Like, what can the water create? What can it destroy potentially? And this tension between the creative power of the collective, and maybe water sort of representing that whole. I mean, certainly in the Oracle card, this is like a deity, like you said, this divine force that brings life to us humans here on Earth, and also can wipe out some of our creations and life at the same time. And then Five of Swords is sort of like the human version, a little bit of that, like the power to create from the water and through magic and through connection with spirit. But then the human ego intervening to try and control and take over and exert itself over what can be a really productive, creative process. So intention, I feel like this is just sort of like saying, Sweet Coke, keep going. Like, these are the tensions to continue exploring the creative power and the human ego and the opportunity that's there, and the destruction that's brought when ego comes forward too much. What else am I missing? What else do you think about these cards?
No, I definitely felt that through these cards that this is, my mission, but also be mindful of the ways that, the work could be destructive if you were to take it with malintent. So do so with, positive intent, with the intention to create life through fluidity and create positivity and help things grow through this concept of like water being able to take different forms and different shapes.
Yeah. So your next card is the Five of Cups, and that was for the question, what message can I convey as I work with these two concepts? And so in this card, you have a young witch on the beach, and behind them is a picnic, like a really nice feast. But in front of them on the sand are three cups that have been spilled or broken, and the witch is focused almost exclusively on what's been broken, what isn't working, even though behind them is this big, lavish buffet that could be enjoyed. And so what message can you convey as you work with these concepts? It seems like the Five of Cups for me is about showing us that our focus may be too much so on what isn't working, instead of focusing on what is present, what resources are available, what can bring us together. A feast is something that we unite around. And so with this witch focusing only on what's broken, which is just actually a small piece of the picture, they are missing this opportunity to continue to bring people together for joy, for creative purposes, for whatever reason. And so in this case, reminding people to kind of continue focusing on the opportunity, to continue focusing on the power of the collective, not just how the collective can kind of devolve into some ego slime pile.
Absolutely. And definitely seeing that even though three cups have fallen and that wine has been spilt, there's still two cups on the table. The wine bottle is more than likely still full. There's probably another wine bottle in the basket, lots of food to enjoy. And, even though that, looking at the full picture, there are, some pieces of the paper that's been charred, there's still readable pieces on the paper, and there's still areas that can be uplifted and seen for the positive. I mean, there's still balloons. The balloons have not lost their helium. They're still there, and they're flying in the wind in front of a beautiful palm tree and shrub landscape in the background. So also seeing the beauty, right? She's missing the beauty of being on the beach, being, with the ocean and with the scenery there too.
Mm-hmm. And your next card is who needs to hear this message. And here you have the 8 of Swords, which is one of my favorite cards to see in a reading because it really, I think, provides this huge opportunity for people. So the 8 of Swords to me is about how our own minds and the thoughts that run through them function to keep us in a cage rather than empowering us or encouraging us to expand or go bigger. So a lot of these thoughts come from the dominant culture, movies, television, all the things we consume in a cultural sense. They come from our families, they come from our religious institutions, they come from friends and people we've been in relationships with. And sometimes without us even recognizing it, we've internalized those stories or those thoughts or those ideas that we are too limited. And so when we work with the 8 of Swords, we have this opportunity for liberation because we stop and say, what is this thought? Oh, that is a thought. That's like what happens when we internalize them is they just like run through our mind and they're just in the background, kind of like our furniture. Like we don't really, it's there all the time, every day doing its job, but we don't really notice it. And when we don't notice it, it just gets to continue. But this card can say like, hey, check out what's going on in your mind. What are those thoughts that are keeping you from doing something, pursuing something, believing in something, and how can you extract those thoughts and change them? So this card just reminded me, like, there's so many, every one of us is doing this all the time. We're always in a process of trying to expand. Some of us are trying to expand and keep growing, but there are many people, I think, especially right now, given the way the world is and how distorted reality has become, how much argument there is over what's real and what isn't, the incessant fighting and the adversity and aggression that's coming out in just like dealing with problems. All of this makes people want to say it like, just like, I don't know what to do. I give up. This is too big. This is too much. There's nothing for little old me to do. And then, but your art can, as it plays with these tensions, can show people, no, there's still plenty of room for coming together for a feast, for finding unity, for understanding one another, for connecting across cultures and differences to live in a better world.
Absolutely. I felt that too through this card as you were explaining it to me. Things started clicking for me with this card, especially with the idea of productivity for artists, right? With this idea of you have more time, you're quarantining, you should be producing 1 to 2 pieces every week. You should be writing books of poetry, right? And this idea of, productivity for you doesn't have to look like a capitalistic viewpoint or in that sense. And also what I noticed in the picture of it is that, so we do believe in the spirit animal. So her spirit animal behind them is just kind of waiting and trying to figure out how to knock down the swords that are surrounding her. And then it seems like there's somebody else's spirit animal. Maybe it's a partner or somebody who cares about them, looking over them, trying to give them some sort of guidance to give them their power back, so they can kind of shed themselves from the cage that they could be in. So yeah, I felt a lot of power from this card to kind of like ponerme las pilas, to like get the energy to start again, right, with the art and the connectivity and the messages that I've been trying to portray. So that card really gave me ganas.
Good. Yeah, it's a good motivator card. And it's, if there are people out there who need to hear or see or be reminded of their own power, just when you're producing the art, you're reminding yourself of the same thing. Like, because you can't really ask someone to believe in something if you're not going to try and believe it yourself.
Right.
And then your final question was, why am I the person to create this? Love this answer. You got the Justice card. Yes. And I think it almost doesn't merit that much explanation, but just that your soul, your purpose in this life, and especially as someone who moved between cultures, part of your purpose is to bring more justice into the world, to point toward the need for justice for people, and doing that through your art, your poetry, what you do as a mental health professional. All of these things are what one of the big, powerful engines in your life.
Absolutely. I definitely felt that too. And the way that you explained it to me, as well as, the visual representation of, trying to find a balance. And in order to find balance, you have to bring another perspective. Because if you're only, cooking with a certain types of herbs, you're never going to have that balance from the other side if you don't bring those in to kind of share and mix together. So thank you for explaining all the cards to me and helping me with some of the questions I had been having about art during a pandemic, before, during, and even now.
I'm glad it could help, and I appreciate you for sharing your own journey and some of the things you're wrestling with. And of course, these are my understandings of the cards, but for you and for anyone listening, also paying attention to what the card is communicating to you outside of what other people might say is especially important. So this spread, we want our friends who are watching to try it out themselves, and even kind of whatever you're struggling with. I think this spread could be a nice starting place to kind of reignite that fire. And so once again, it's a 5-card spread. It starts with asking the tarot for 2 things in combination that you as an artist can play with. Card number 3 is, what message can I convey as I work with these 2 concepts? Question 4, who needs to hear this message? And question 5, why am I the person to create this? So we hope that you will try it out. Sweetco Zamorano Chavez, I am so excited that you came on the show and talked with us. Tell everyone where they can find you and hear more from you and see your artwork and buy your artwork.
Absolutely. So I have an Instagram and I have a Twitter, and the handle is @2spiritqueer. I also have a blog that you can go check out some of my poetry, more of my visual art. And I also have the links in both of my IG and my Twitter, and on my blog, where you can find some of my art. And it'll also tell you whether you can find the original pieces or merchandise with the artwork on it. So you can contact me, and you can get beautiful original artwork pieces.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to go check out Sweetco's work and invest in it, to bring it into your home. And I'm so excited to see what else you continue to create. And I'm so honored to know you. Just like doing this project, I've gotten to meet some really cool people during a pandemic when you can't really meet people, except I guess you can. And yeah, it's a treasure to know you. And I hope we can talk soon and talk about tarot again.
Yes, thank you so much for your insight. You're so knowledgeable about the tarot cards. I play every now and again with them, but hearing your perspective from them, and then me being able to put my perspective from your definitions and your understanding of having used tarot for so long is so helpful and insightful for me and my artistic journey as we continue through this pandemic, evidently. So I really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much. And I love being in a community with you. And yeah, let's do this again. This is great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sweet Code. Take care. And we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Cosmic Rescue. There will be more to come. We release new episodes on the new moon and the full moon. And if you'd like to hang out with us in between, you can find us at typewritertarot.com. We offer private readings. We do tarot for events. We have workshops and classes, and we put out little doses of tarot insight on our Instagram feed at Typewriter Tarot. So check us out there. Our theme music is I'm Ready by Magical Objects. You can find their music anywhere music can be found. And an additional thanks to Annar Verold, who is our editor for this series. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.